A warm greetings to one and all. In this session, let's learn about static data member and member function using C++. Topics to be covered in this session are introduction to static data member, introduction to static member function, and finally, let's check out few example programs for the same. Let's have an introduction to static data member. They are class level variables and they are shared by all the instances of the class. It means that all the objects of the class have access to the same copy of the static data member. Static data members are useful for maintaining informations that are common to all objects, such as a counter for the number of objects created and so on. Now let's check out few key points. So it shares among all the instances, which means static data members are shared among all the instances of the classes. Static data members has only class scope. Static data members must be defined outside the class definition. The lifetime of the static data member is it exists for the lifetime of the entire program. Now let's have an example program for static data member. First, let me explain the code and then we can see how the code gets executed. So here we have defined the class definition for class sample. Inside the class sample, we have private access specifier and we have declared the variable count of integer data type and declared with static since it is static variable. Next, using public access specifier, we have declared the function show count of. The return type of the showCount function is void and it has no argument passed. And inside the showCount function, we have incremented the variable count and it displays the value of the variable count to the user using cout statement. Then the class gets ended with closed curly parenthesis and semicolon. Next, it is initializing the static variable count. The variable count is initialized to 1 here using scope resolution operator double colon. This implies that it is an integer data type and it belongs to the class sample. Since it is static variable, it is defined outside the class definition. Next, we have main function. So inside the main function, we have created three objects, namely S1, S2, S3 for the class sample. Then, using the object S1, we have accessed the function showCountof. Next, using the object S2, we have accessed the function showCountof. Next, using the object S3, we have accessed the function showCountof. Next, return 0 and the code gets terminated here. Now let's see how code gets executed. We all know that the execution starts from main program. Inside the main program, we have created three objects, namely S1, S2, and S3 for the class sample. The next statement is S1 dot show countof. It means that the object S1 is accessing the function show countof. So now the control is shifted to the class sample and access the function show countof. Here it displays the value of the count, the variable static variable count, which is initialized to 1 using cout statement to the user as shown in the output. So we can see that count is equal to 1 is displayed to the user. So after displaying the value of the variable count to the user, the count variable is being incremented. So now count is equal to 2. So then the control is shifted to the main program. So here we have s2.showCountof, which means using the object s2, we are trying to access the function showCountof. So now the control is moved to the class sample and moves to the function showCountof. Here it displays the value of the variable count, that is 2. Count is equal to 2 is displayed to the user as shown in the output, and the value of the count is incremented. So 2 plus 1, now it is 3. So now the control is shifted to the main program. So here using the object S3, again we are accessing the function showCountof. So now the control is shifted to the class sample and then to the function showCountof. Here it displays the value of the variable count to the user as count is equal to 3 as shown in the output. Next, the value of the variable count has been incremented and then it returns back to the main. The next statement is return 0. Return 0 implies that the successful execution of the code. Then the code gets terminated here. Hope you are clear in this example program which illustrates the static data member. Now let's have an introduction to static data members. So static data members belongs to class. Instead, they are not belongs to any particular object of the class. They can be called using the class name directly and can only access static data members or other static member functions. They do not have access to these pointers because they are not associated with a particular object. Now let's have key points for static member function. Static member functions are called on the class itself, not on the instance of the class. They can access only static data members and static member functions. They do not have access to these pointers. Now let's have an example program using static member function. First, let me explain the code and then we can see how the code gets executed. So here we have defined the class definition for the class ID generator. Inside the class ID generator, using private access specifier, we have declared the variable next ID of integer data type and it is declared as static. So it is a static variable. Next, using public access specifier, we have declared the member function gen next ID of integer data type as return type and then it is declared as static. It is static member function. So inside the function gen next ID, we have incremented the variable next ID and then it displays the value of the variable next ID to the user using cout statement. Next, the class gets ended by closed curly parenthesis and semicolon. Next is initializing the static variable next ID. The variable next ID is initialized to 1 using the scope resolution operator. This implies that it is an integer data type, that is, next ID variable is integer data type and it belongs to the class ID generator. Since it is static variable, it is defined outside the class definition. So next, main function. So inside the main function, using for loop, the variable I is initialized to 0 and it verifies that I is less than or equal to 2 and then it increments the I and inside the loop, we have called the function next ID using the class name with scope resolution operator. Since it is static member function, we no need to create object to access the static member function. Instead, we can use class name, scope resolution operator, and static member function to access the static member function. Next, it is return 0. It implies that the code gets terminated here. Now let's see the execution of the code. We all know that the execution starts from the main function. So inside the main function, we have for loop. In for loop, we have declared the variable I and initialized to the value 0 and it is of integer data type. So next we have the condition that I is less than or equal to less than 2. Next I is being incremented. Since I value is equal to 0 and it is less than 2, now we have to execute the next statement that is ID generator scope resolution gen next ID, which means that we are accessing the static member function gen next ID using the class name. Since it is static member function, we are not creating object to access the member function. Instead, we are using the class name to access the static member function. So now the control transfers to the class ID generator and then checks for the member function, static member function gen next ID. So here, using cout statement, it displays the value of the variable next ID, that is, which is initialized to 1 already in the program. So it displays the value next ID equal to 1 as shown in the output to the user. Next, it increments the value of the variable next ID. Then the value of the next ID becomes 2 right now. Again, the control is being shifted to the main program. So here the loops again get started. Now the loop variable is being incremented, that is 0 plus 1 it is 1, and it checks for the condition. So 1 is less than 2. So again, we are accessing the static member function using the class name ID generator. So now the control moves to the class ID generator and checks for the function nextGen ID. Here it displays the value of the variable next ID. So already it has been incremented by 1. So the value of the next ID is 2. It is displayed to the user as shown in the output. Now it is incremented to 3 and then the control is shifted to the main. Now the loop variable is 1 and it is incremented by 1. So the variable of the loop, that is I, is equal to 2. So now I is equal to 2. It is not less than 2. So the loop gets terminated. The next statement is return 0. So return 0 implies the successful execution of the code and the code gets terminated here. So hope you are clear in static member function using this example program. Thank you all.